The WWE SummerSlam 2024 Fallout has begun, as this week's edition of Raw felt like a Raw after WrestleMania, as there was a lot that took place on the show, a lot of interesting storyline developments, and I thought one of the best Raws we've seen in a while in WWE because of all the things you had in motion here coming out of SummerSlam. So just as we always say about after WrestleMania, right? It's kind of that start of the next, season in WWE. And you kind of felt that way after SummerSlam here because it seems like Triple H treated this as though, hey, this is the start of a new season as we now move from SummerSlam to Survivor Series to the Rumble to WrestleMania and so forth, right? That's how this felt. And that's why I think this was such a good show because you had so many different elements in place to where everything felt like, all right, we're starting some things somewhere, we're finishing some things elsewhere, but it really was kind of about kickstarting a lot of new chapters for all these big storylines, and that's why I thought this was such a good show. But the biggest one, perhaps for a lot of people, was the fallout with the Judgment Day, because we knew it's SummerSlam, just as we talked about, and would highly recommend. Check out all of our SummerSlam reaction stuff we've done here on the channel, both the live show after SummerSlam, the Roman Reigns video, talking about his comeback and everything. But just like we talked about at SummerSlam, this was going to be the turning point for the Judgment Day, and that's exactly what we saw, because it was, as we know, Dominik aligning with Liv Morgan, Finn Balor turning on Damian Priest, and that led to the fallout here on this week's Raw, where you did have a lot of moving pieces. Damian Priest takes on JD McDonagh, and then we kind of get, the big reveal before that of Finn Balor. The camera zooms out, Balor talking to Priest, via the Titantron there, and then the camera zooms out, and we see this new version of the Bloodline. All your questions are answered. What the hell was Carlito up to? We now know. Carlito, spits in the face of people who don't want to be cool, and apparently he thought that Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley did not want to be cool because he has aligned himself with this group. We knew that Dominik and Liv were going to be together, so I thought the visual of getting Finn Balor there, kind of as the mastermind of this new Judgment Day. You have JD and Carlito on one side. You have Dominik, kissing up on Liv Morgan on the other side. Thought that was a great touch to really add that anger for Damian Priest. And then to add the anger for someone else, because this is the face of someone you do not want to mess with, and that is Rhea Ripley, who came out and just threw Liv Morgan right into the steel post there, and she did not hold back. But that's the way it should be, right? It should be that way. She shouldn't come out and just, walk her over and then just, barely throw it. No, she just picked her up and she just slung her right into the steel post. And then you kind of had that moment. We have Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley standing tall. If there were any questions as to whether Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley were going to be monster baby faces coming out of this whole feud, they were answered on this week's Raw, because the way you saw the crowd react to them, and we talked about it before, right? You think about like the Damian Priest title run. There are a lot of people who felt like it was a little underwhelming and all that. But I thought most recently, probably over the past, month and a half, 2 months, whatever, the match with Gunther, I thought was the best match on the SummerSlam card. And I think that really elevated him into kind of maybe that level some people were looking for. But even before that, you started to see him find his groove a little bit. I think this is going to help him find his groove even more, because he is now in a position where, again, the fans are reacting more and more to him. And now that you have the official split, we have even more reason to care, right? Because he's now been screwed over by his former friends. And that's a story, you can sort of connect to now as you see what happens with Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley trying to get their revenge on this new version of the Judgment Day, led by Finn Balor, who I think is going to be great in this role. I thought he was great, on this Raw, just kind of playing up just the heel demon saying that, hey, I'm going to come after you, Priest, when just when you think, you're done with me, or just when you're not thinking about me anymore, I'm going to come after you. And he did that kind of in this one, right? Priest had his match, and he's occupied with JD and everyone else out there. But then here comes Balor to interfere. And so kind of having Balor just sneak up on Priest in a lot of scenarios moving forward could be interesting. But we know we're heading towards a one-on-one match there with Priest and Balor. We know we're going to get the one-on-one rematch with Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan, perhaps inside a Hell in a Cell scenario, perhaps at Bad Blood, something like that. But there's a lot of fun stuff coming out of this Judgment Day thing. And I think it's only gonna get better from here, based on you kind of have Priest and Ripley where you need them now. You have this new version of the Judgment Day, Dominik playing off Liv. Like, they weren't even a big part of the show, but we know they're going to be as we move forward. And so, yeah, like, I think it all makes sense. It all fits together. And, there was also some hesitation wondering, is Rhea going to come out of this looking bad? Because maybe she was too naive about Dom, pulling one over on her and being with Liv or whatever. I don't think that's going to be the case, as they kind of saw here, because you're not really thinking about that when Rhea comes out and just, kicks the hell out of Liv, like, right? You're not thinking about that at that time. So I think it's going to be perfectly fine with Rhea, and, it's all going to be about just destruction, them trying to destroy this new group for what they did to them. So, yeah, I thought that was very heated on the show, and a perfect sort of next step after everything that happened at SummerSlam. So I think it all connects, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with the Judgment Day saga. But to go back to the start of this week's Raw, there's a lot of different directions I can go here. We'll get to a lot of them. Trust me, this may be a little bit of a longer reaction show, because there was a lot of, like I said, I think noteworthy stuff on this show. But to go back to the start, you had our new World Heavyweight Champion, Gunther, come out, and he figured out who his first challenger is going to be. And who is it? None other than Randy Orton, as Orton comes out to make the claim that he should get a rematch with Gunther based on the controversial pin at King of the Ring. So I know a lot of people were saying, well, how can Orton come out and do this? You have the brand split in place. You guys know, you've watched the videos before. I don't give a damn about the brand split. I'm perfectly okay if people want to go back and forth. But you had a perfectly understandable reason here as to why they brought Randy Orton over. And Orton explained it, saying, Triple H is the one that even said, we're probably going to get that rematch at some point. And so even Triple H thinks we should have this rematch. I mean, Triple H is the guy running the show, right? Like, he is the person in charge, even above Adam Pearce, even above Nick Aldis. So Orton has gotten Triple H's blessing to have this match based on the controversy. And as Orton said, Gunther is only champion because of Randy Orton, because, it was one where, you had sort of the shoulder up, the pin at King of the Ring, and Orton saying, hey, that's the only reason you got this opportunity to win the title when you didn't actually beat me. And here was the good thing, I thought. Gunther's response to this, saying, basically this was a stain on his record. I love what they're doing with this guy. Like, this guy doesn't want to just be champion. He wants to be perfect, right? Like, he wants to beat everyone, leave no doubt, choke them out, everything, and that's it. The stain on his record of any sort of controversial speak about his win over Orton at King of the Ring, Gunther wants to throw all that out the window at Bash in Berlin, because we know that's where we're getting the World Heavyweight Championship match between Gunther and Randy Orton. And I thought that was a nice touch, just continuing to push, bringing prestige back to this great sport. And he wants to get rid of this stain on his record. Any sort of doubt that people thought that he was not the better man against Randy Orton, he's going to try to quiet those doubts at Bash in Berlin. And again, I think this is something too, having Orton challenge here, to me, can be the first step towards getting towards Orton and Cody Rhodes. What do I mean by that? Well, my thought is that if you go into this, you know kind of what Gunther is going to do from just the way he's going to approach this match. Gunther is a very cerebral and strategic wrestler. So what should he do? He should go after the back of Randy Orton, right? He should go after all these pieces on Randy Orton's body that have just, they've taken their toll now over the years. And we know the back has been kind of the big focus. And so I'm wondering, do they do the scenario where Orton is just, he's trying and trying, but he just cannot get over that next hump, right? In terms of beating Gunther. And it's because the wear and tear and everything that has been taken out of him, not just from the back injury, but from the recent attacks from the Bloodline. And maybe that's where, commentary's playing it up, and you just kind of have them continuing to further the point that, man, who knows? This could have been a different Randy Orton if he didn't get attacked by the Bloodline, put through the table, and all that. And it's like, can you kind of bring up the old wounds for Orton in this match against Gunther? And is that what starts to precipitate that turn and that frustration towards Cody, where Orton realizes, okay, this was my opportunity to win another world title? And we saw his eyes, right? Remember the sit down with Cody in the back? We saw Randy's eyes kind of glazing at that title. They're really glaring and giving a good look at that championship to show what it means to him. So if he comes up short here, and it's because of something that happened and an injury, an old injury that comes up from him just getting taken out by the Bloodline while Cody is sitting there, hung in the ropes watching this thing, then maybe that starts to build the frustration and where Orton realizes, okay, it's Cody's fault. And again, that's where you bring in the sort of delusional heel type thing, to where all of a sudden he's getting frustrated. He realizes his only path forward to get a championship now is Cody. And he has to, again, kind of take out some of that frustration on Cody Rhodes, and maybe that's how we get there. But nonetheless, I think you're going to have another good match between Gunther and Randy Orton. But, as we'll sure when we make our Bash at Berlin predictions, I don't think it's going to be a title change here. I think this is going to be one where Gunther gets his clean win against Randy Orton, and then that sends Orton into the next stratosphere. But I also want to bring up something quickly, too. I'm going to do a video on this, actually, coming up soon. There are so many significant matches that Gunther can have as a world champion. There are so many opponents just on Raw that he can have tremendous matches with that he already has kind of a story built in with. But just keep that in mind. Look down the list and you're going to realize, my goodness, there are 10-plus matches that Gunther could have as champion. Just a singles match with a lot of different opponents out there. So I thought that was good to kind of set that up. And then we got to get into some other stuff. Seth Rollins was a big part of this show as he came out to answer kind of CM Punk, who was saying he's not here to talk, he's here to fight, and Punk wanted, Drew McIntyre, and they wanted the rematch now. He was ready to go after him. We would eventually get Drew McIntyre, and of course that would lead to Punk chasing him off after McIntyre pokes the bear a little too much and brings out the bracelet yet again with AJ Lee and Larry the Dog's name on it, and that causes Punk to go after him. But before that, we had Rollins come out talking about how he had waited 10 years to finally fight CM Punk, and this was the opportunity. Rollins comes out wearing the big jacket, takes it off, and he's ready to fight. You can tell he's got his fighting gear on, and he's ready to go. But, as we said, it was McIntyre who eventually poked a little too far. Punk decided rather than getting that one-on-one right now with Seth Rollins, and remember, that was good because you had them both in the ring, they're ready to fight, you tease it just long enough to where the people want it so bad, but then you make them wait longer because Drew McIntyre takes it too far. Punk goes after him. That leaves Rollins all alone in the ring. And then we had what may have been the most unpredictable thing of the night, but it also may have been the most incredible thing of the evening. You guys know, I love my monster heels. And this was a scenario where you built a monster heel in a span of about 3 minutes in Bronson Reed. There have been a lot of people who have talked about Bronson Reed over the years. He started off in NXT, had a good run there. Eventually, he goes to New Japan, makes a stop in TNA/Impact, comes back, and people are wondering, okay, is Triple H going to, help him get to that next level here? And so far, he's been someone that's had good matches, but you're still waiting for that big sort of moment, right? This was his big moment because his destruction of Seth Rollins was so, again, unpredictable. Like you didn't see it coming, even though he had teased in, a couple segments before that, where, he's bringing up after the Sheamus Ludwig Kaiser match. Bronson Reed's bringing up the fact that he beat Sheamus last week, and yet he's not on this show, and he's asking Adam Pearce, what is that? And Pearce, kind of just gives him a little response, and Reed just says, all right, we'll have to do things my way. And, you're not connecting it together, right? Because there's no reason to connect Bronson Reed with Seth Rollins. And that's what makes it great, because then he comes out and he's like, all right, I'm going to make an impact. How does he make an impact? By hitting tsunami after tsunami after tsunami on Seth Rollins. It was fantastic. And, you have Rollins playing up the internal bleeding. Michael Cole later in the show says Seth Rollins has been sent to the hospital to get x-rays and CAT scans. They're checking him for the internal bleeding. All this. You have a match that was just built in a span of a couple minutes where now this thing has huge heat because the fans love Seth Rollins. And they now may have to love Bronson Reed a little bit more because of what he just did. And I know people say, well, they were chanting for him to keep doing it to Seth Rollins. But, I think it was just probably just the shock factor of realizing this guy's not just giving one of these. He's going again and again and again, and the officials are trying to stop him, and he just keeps going. That was impressive. And again, you just built a huge heel in the span of a couple minutes just by having him destroy, one of the most loved babyfaces. It's very simple. This thing doesn't have to be complicated. Professional wrestling does not have to be complicated. And so I thought that was just a tremendous segment, and now we know we're getting the match. I don't know if it's going to happen as soon as Berlin, but you have a big singles match now to build to with Bronson Reed and Seth Rollins. So I was a huge fan of that. I thought that was one of the best things on the show. If not, I mean, you could even argue maybe it was the best thing on the show in terms of just making an impact. And so that was something that I thought was, again, very good on this edition of Raw. We will now get to the main event part. As you guys know, I go in random order here. But the main event, the Wyatt Sicks make their in-ring debut. We said it before. They had to get to the ring. That's when everybody was going to really kind of judge where this thing goes from here. I've seen a lot of positive feedback on this match because I thought, and I agree, it was exactly what it needed to be. They're playing into the history of the Wyatt family 11 years ago, all of this stuff, like you had all the connection and everything there. You bring Eric Rowan in, you bring Dexter Lumis in, you bring Joe Gacy in, and I thought just the presentation overall was really good. They were not just there, doing all the different stuff. I know people had their concerns about this being too supernatural and all this. Like, everybody's talked about. That's been kind of the buzzword, I feel like. But, there was none of that here. They got in the ring. They were on a mission, and they took out American Made, which is now the new, faction name for Chad Gable and the Creed brothers. We didn't get the Hulk Hogan WCW entrance music for American Made, but that's okay. But you had what you needed here. Like, they needed to come out and just basically kick ass, and they did. And I think that's what you want out of this Wyatt Sicks group. And I thought it was also good to have Uncle Howdy just sitting there, in the chair, in the aisle. Like, that just adds another kind of one of those just, odd dynamics, right? But that's what makes it different and unique. And so, I thought it was good. I mean, good match in the main event. And I really felt like that they presented this group what they needed to be as this sort of dominant force where, yes, Chad Gable and the Creed brothers got a little bit of offense in on this match, but this was really all about just showing that, this is kind of the thing that's motivating this group, right? We know all the different, kind of motivations behind it. They played it in those individual videos, the VHS tapes and all that. So we know what these people are here for and what they're trying to achieve. And again, they came out and they felt like, Chad Gable has been one of the key focuses from the beginning with all this, and they took him out. And I thought Eric Rowan was impressive in this match, and everyone kind of played their role the way it needed to be, and just the overall presentation, as we said, you didn't have any of the wild lighting or anything like that. And this is where I think this thing can succeed because of that. And so, yes, was it different than a lot of other things on the show? Sure it was, but it still, I thought, was effective for having it as their in-ring debut. You put it in the main event spot, you make it feel important, and now, again, there's reasons to really buy into this group moving forward. And also, something I always like to point out, it can be like one of those things where you're like, well, this maybe isn't for me and all that, but if you heard the crowd reaction, the crowd was tremendous on this show. They were great, and they really elevated, some of this show. But overall, they had a lot of good stuff to kind of, respond to. But the crowd was great. They're so into this group. And I think, again, why would WWE change anything when the crowd is clearly responding to what they're doing with the Wyatt Sicks right now? And so they are victorious in their in-ring debut. Okay, one more thing, and then we're going to go quick hitter style on everything else. You guys know I kind of like to highlight the biggest things on the show, and then we'll kind of, do rapid fire on the rest of it. But Sami Zayn was down in the back. He was not physically down, but you could tell emotionally this guy was feeling the effects of his loss of the Intercontinental Championship to Bron Breakker. And we're now going to get another match between the two next week, but it's going to be 2 out of 3 falls now for the Intercontinental Championship. I thought Bron Breakker also had a great promo earlier in the night talking about how his nameplates are bolted on that title, and there's no one that's going to take the nameplates off. Breakker is just coming into his own here, and now he gets another match with Zayn next week. But they weren't just doing that, right? They teased the next step for Sami Zayn towards getting back to the Bloodline saga, as it was Jey Uso coming up, and you have Jey telling Sami everything's going to be okay. Remember, Dragunov was kind of inspiring Sami to remember how great he was as a champion. Jey is trying to do the same thing. And then Jey says, don't worry, after you get your Intercontinental Championship back next week, we're going to work on you being a double champ, because we are going to go after the tag team titles because we have unfinished business with the Judgment Day. So just as we said a couple weeks ago, they get the pin on Balor and JD. We're not going to forget that, because they're going to get a tag team title match at some point in the near future. Who knows? Maybe that's where, Rhea gets involved. We know Jey and Jey has a thing for Rhea. Rhea gets involved, costs them the tag team championships. Maybe that's where Priest costs them the tag team championships, right? So there's a lot of ways you can play this up, but clearly setting in motion, just as we said, a potential tag team championship win for Sami Zayn and Jey Uso to move them closer to the Bloodline story, with the Bloodline having the tag team titles on SmackDown right now. So if you have both of these entities as tag champions on opposite brands, we all know you can really build that to something special. And so it seems like that's the way they're headed with this. You would not expect Sami to regain that Intercontinental Championship next week. I think it's going to be Breaker's. And having a 2 out of 3 falls match is exciting because that gives Breaker a chance to really prove, that he and Sami can have a great match here. And they've had it before. But, the one at SummerSlam was shorter. And I was okay with that because you really wanted to establish kind of the strength and that burst of offense from Bron Breakker. So, yeah, I think we're going to have a good match next week, and then it's going to be all about the next steps towards getting Sami and Jey back to the Bloodline story. But elsewhere, I mentioned earlier, Sheamus and Ludwig Kaiser had a great match to start this show. Like that, during the commercial-free first hour, like they went at it. And just as you expect, right? Like these two are hard hitters, and I think Kaiser's an interesting one because he is also someone that's coming into his own here, kind of stepping out of the shadow of Gunther, even though that's something interesting you could play with in the future with Gunther and Kaiser. But Sheamus gets a big win here, still playing up the story with Pete Dunne. So that was something, that I thought was significant. Even though Kaiser loses, he still comes out of this looking good. Sheamus still has the thing with Pete Dunne they've got to get to in terms of, that's a singles match they're going to build to at some point in the near future and all that. Elsewhere, you continue to have kind of the women's trios kind of, situation here, although it was much less about that this time. But Damage Control getting involved with Sonya Deville, Shayna Baszler, and Zoe Stark. That was something here. Lyra Valkyria has the match with Shayna Baszler. Elsewhere, you had some stuff with, kind of brought Ivy Nile back into the mix too. I thought that was an interesting backstage thing where, Maxine Dupree's asking, where Ivy Nile had been and all that. So I'm curious how she fits into the story moving forward with this American-made thing and Alpha Academy and all that. AOP and New Day. Odyssey Jones finally makes his Raw debut. The guy was drafted 14 years ago, and he's finally on Raw. I kid, but remember, he was kind of part of that draft, and it now, just kind of out of nowhere, right? He comes and makes the save for the New Day. So we always talk about Triple H and his factions and his trios. Clearly, Odyssey Jones aligning with the New Day now against the Final Testament. Of course, we'd all love to see Big E in there, but they've got Odyssey Jones added to the mix. So he comes out and was also very impressive. There's a lot of meat on this show with, kind of the big man making a huge impact. Bronson Reed, Odyssey Jones, and so forth. So, yeah, he was very impressive in his offense, taking out the Final Testament. And so you had Grayson Waller and Austin Theory get the win against Miz and R-Truth. I'm sure you guys saw it. We're starting to see that frustration boil over with the Miz. And I have no doubt that the Miz is going to turn on R-Truth at some point. You've gotten pretty much everything you need out of this tag team at this point. So I think getting Miz maybe back into singles action, having him turn on Truth based on kind of the finish here, you had a little bit of the miscommunication. So I could certainly see that being a direction in the immediate future with Miz turning on Truth. So that was something else you had on the show. I'm looking to see if there's anything else that I'm forgetting. I probably am. But, this was such a packed show that, again, this was a big one where it did have that Raw after WrestleMania type feel, and they played up so many things here as, we now move towards Berlin, and then we keep going towards Bad Blood, Survivor Series, and all that. So, yeah, I thought this was a great show, and I'm curious to know what you guys thought about this week's edition of Raw. What did you enjoy the most? Is there anything you didn't like about this show? I just thought there was really nothing on this show that I look back at and I'm like, well, why was that there? Everything had a purpose, even though, like we said, there's going to be your main event stuff, there's going to be your undercard stuff, but it all fits. And I thought this was one of their best Raws in a while, to be honest with you, based on all that. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments, and always appreciate your feedback. Be sure to subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out, and let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw.